Up next, we've got a panel including the love of Joanna, but also a load of other informed and informative, hopefully, panelists. So can I get my panel joining here? Emil is there. Emil, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How about you, Chris?
I'm not bad. I'm not bad. How's your internet connection today?
Better. Last time I did a panel, my fuse blew, so suddenly everything just went dark, and I was stressed out for 5 minutes. But now we're good.
You were stressed out. I was going, oh my god, I don't know what this is about. So it was good.
Yeah. So don't worry.
You came back, which I appreciate.
I've ensured better stability on both, fuses and power this time.
Fantastic. So, you've got a backup generator. You're plugged into the grid.
Pretty much.
Right, well, I think you're going to be moderating this. I understand.
Yeah.
Emil from Funday Factory. I'm going to probably let you introduce your panelists and crack on. We're trying to get Langer in. He hopefully will probably join in a little bit. We're just sort of chasing him up at the moment, but he's usually very punctual as Langer, but hopefully he'll be with us soon. But you can get started and I'll disappear into the ether.
Thanks, Chris. And this is a great excuse to follow up from Joe's talk around social games because we'll keep discussing the subject. So with us today, we have a really nice lineup of panelists. So I want to give them a few minutes to introduce themselves. But it's Parin Shah from Lego Ventures, it's Joanna Haslam from Snapfinger Click, and it's Benjamin Charbit from Darewise. So Benjamin, do you wanna go first? Can you tell us a little bit about where you're from and what your angle is in terms of developing social games?
Sure, thank you very much. Hi, I'm Benjamin. I'm the co-founder of a French studio called Darewise Entertainment. We're a 40-people team developing a social MMO that we've been working on for the past 3 years now. Previously, I was a game director at Ubisoft. I worked on most of my career on a game called Assassin's Creed. I mean, on several installments of the franchise. It was a fun experience, but always focusing on online game over there. Working on The Division, Ghost Recon Online, and Assassin's Creed. So huge fan of social play, connected experiences, how games bring people together. I started this whole thing when. As a kid, at the very beginning of esport, I became a competitive player back in the days when it was very hard to predict that you could build a career out of it. I guess I was born a bit too early. I wish I was 15 today. So that's my background, and thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you. And Parin, do you have a background in esports as well?
I do not, unfortunately. I grew up playing Football Manager, which is probably slightly different end of the spectrum. But yeah, hi everyone, and very, very nice to be here. I'm Parin, I'm with Lego Ventures. So we are the entity within the Lego brand group that's all about investing in gaming and really furthering the Lego idea. So the Lego idea is all around learning through play. So we are trying to find the best way for both kids and adults to play in the future. I think social is pretty core to our thesis, alongside just having fun, being active, and there being meaning to the gameplay. So I think that's reasonably novel actually in the VC space, but we're pretty laser focused on stuff that we think can scale, can be a big outcome, but can really drive the Lego brand forward. And my background actually isn't really in gaming. So prior to Lego Ventures, I was with a startup for a couple of years, banking background before that, but I'm a big fan of games and really glad that I can do this for a living and get to play games in my spare time and during work.
Excellent. Thank you, Parin. And Joe, even though you just came from a panel, just in case there's anyone new joining, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and Snapfinger?
Yeah, apologies for people who saw this already. But yeah, my name's Joe. I'm a game designer. I'm a design director at Snapfinger Click at the moment, but I've been working in games for 13 years now. And I started out working at a company called Relentless Software, making the Buzz quiz games. And I've just been working I've done a few different things, but the core of my games has always been social gaming, games that just bring people together and games that can be played together. Most of my experience is console, but I've done a bit of mobile as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. And my name is Emil. I'll be your moderator today. I'm a product manager at Funday Factory. We're a mobile game studio. We've done a bunch of real-time multiplayer games. Lately, we've done a real-time multiplayer shooter game, and we're also developing multiplayer games for Snapchat. I've been in games for, if you count the weird indie day phase I had, I've been in games for about 12 years. Prior to joining Funday, I did a multiplayer, local couch multiplayer, of course, for the Ouya, really underwhelming console, but really like a really good social experience. And I think a huge part of their success back then was actually also sort of leaning into the promise of sitting together with your friends and playing together. I see Chris James is giving a shout out to the Ouya. It was really fun to work with. But Langerly from Mixi is also supposed to join soon. When he comes, we'll let him give a brief introduction to himself. But let's dive into the topics. So one of the questions, Joe, that you also touched upon in your talk was like, what actually makes a game social? Is there like a specific component that you can add which turns something social? So I think it could be really interesting to hear your take on the different types of social play that exist. So Parin, do you, what's your angle, both privately, but also of course, I guess as Lego Ventures, what role do you see social sort of playing in the future?
Very good question. So I think obviously being Lego, we love construction, we love creation. So I think for us, social means collaborative creation. If we take it a step back, our view is kind of on a 5 to 10 year time frame. Appreciate it's a buzzword that's used quite a lot, but this idea of the metaverse is going to become increasingly real, enabled by a software stack that allows developers to create worlds of perhaps greater and greater fidelity, but ultimately worlds that people want to inhabit and spend an increasing amount of their free time in. And what will they do in those worlds? I think it's interact with their friends, make new friends, and build something meaningful, whether in the sense of it being kind of a simulation of their environment, or whether it's kind of an imagined environment, something that, that world that they inhabit allows them to really kind of explore the furthest extents of motivation, what they want to build. So I think that also ties into the fact that, with Lego, it's a system where anyone can create. I think similarly, games that are being made where anyone can create are really fascinating. And I think there are analogs to more, I guess, media that is not particularly interactive. And the fact that, those types of media there still is a social layer over those. So, people frequently, social networks are not particularly social. TikTok is very interesting, but still, participation rates, there are varying figures. And I think for a large group of people, still not particularly social. The advantage that gaming has, if you put someone in the right environment where they can do whatever they want and they have almost infinite freedom, and then the right amount of constraint layered on top, they can do some really interesting things.
Yeah, I think that actually ties really well into, one of the things that we've been talking about also, like Benjamin, there's different types of constructing a game, and like I think what you say, Parin, about seeing what players actually do in those worlds is really interesting. Benjamin, what's your take on sort of a game like Valheim and the rise of that, and how that sort of approach to player freedom has influenced their growth?
I think this opportunity to express your personality through the tools that the game provide is totally changing the way people start thinking about their own experience. I also think that we have to look at today. The sense of agency is very much taken for granted for several generations. When you think about Gen Z in particular, who they've grown up with Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite, where in Fortnite in the creative mode, where they get to be very much more in control of the experience compared to what we used to be doing. And I can talk a lot about that. In games like Assassin's Creed, where we would bring a very content-driven experience, very structured. So I think we now the Valheim is a very good example of. I think everybody was kind of surprised in a way about the success, but the game is from a mechanic standpoint is really enjoyable. It doesn't require it to be AAA visually polished to still appeal to a huge amount of players, because this sense of agency is absolutely there, and you see amazing creations happening in the game. And so I think this is a very interesting shift. We used to be competing and to just get the most beautiful game and just improve always how polished we could deliver an experience. Now it's more going to be how much control I'm giving away to my players, how much they can play with the rules and play with the tools to create and express their identity, their personality through the game.
Right, Joe, do you agree? Like, is there some truth to the idea that, you know, we've reached a certain level of, you know, visual fidelity, or maybe, you know, even with the added layers of social, the importance of high quality visuals can sort of take a back seat because what social offers us is way more important?
Yeah, I actually think, you know, so it is easier to make a social game that doesn't have the most amazing graphics, because that's not why people are playing a social game. You know, you're not playing it to be wowed by the visuals. You're playing it because you want to do something with your friends. And if you look at some of the most successful social games, you know, Jackbox are really successful with their social games, and they're, you know, they're nice polished visuals, but they're very basic. They don't do 3D. So I actually think that it's a nice space to work in, because you can worry less about that side of things and just focus on building really engaging social mechanics.
So in terms of like which social mechanics are sort of seeing, is there room for like all sorts with co-op and versus and competitive and open world where people get to sort of decide how they interact? Are you sort of seeing any trends there currently?
Oh yeah. Well, I think, you know, any game can be social, and I think like Twitch, obviously for me, is really interesting, because we work, all our games at Snapfinger Click have Twitch integration, so we do stuff that makes that more interactive. And I think Twitch has really changed a lot about how we see social, because any game can be social on Twitch, because it is a social platform. You can play absolutely anything on there, and you're bringing everybody that's watching that experience together socially to talk amongst themselves, to kind of enjoy the experience together. And yeah, I think that for me has made it more interesting in terms of like, how can we build these games that work in other ways on Twitch, actually like utilize those people that are there, let them have a role in it and let them play in it. And I find that it's still quite an untapped area, but it's an area I find very interesting.
So sort of the rise of, you know, not just playing, actively participating, but sort of the in-between of watching, but still sort of engaging with the game, but sort of at a distance.
Yeah, having more of a role, because obviously you can stream any game on Twitch and it's still there is an experience that's enjoyable, but actually giving the viewers some level of participation in the game, I find that personally interests me, and I think that's a space that's still got a lot of room to grow in.
Yeah, Parin, do you see the same trend in terms of like how's LEGO Ventures sort of approaching this in terms of the rise of not just like actively participating, but also, you know, finding enjoyment in like watching social play and being a part of it like that?
Yeah, I think it's something we think about quite a lot. I think the idea of participative play, and, you know, I think even as when you're thinking about children, like that is something which, you know, people love role playing, but also just observing what's going on around them and how their friends are behaving. I think, you know, to us, I think activity is something that we do want to prioritize, because we think that anyone, given the right set of circumstances, anyone can create. So for us, the figure we have in our minds is really, you know, on Roblox, like the number of people actually creating games is remarkably low. When you drill into the detail and creating meaningful games, it's extremely low. But when you look at something like Minecraft, you know, creation is core to that experience. But there's definitely still space for, you know, viewership and more passive play. The question is, on balance, what percentage of time might that resemble? And then even when you look at, I guess, if you look at the kind of player and segment out the day and work out when is that player engaging, there are incredibly, you know, certain parts of the day where passive might be something a bit better. And I'm sure everyone's seen, you know, Genvid and Rival Peak and what they did on Facebook. And I think it's fascinating as an example of like a completely different type of gameplay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I guess like that's also part of what is the challenge, right? Because when you look at YouTube, there's thousands of people watching a video for every one person actually creating something. So it's like there is that big gap. It sounds like that's one of the things that's very core to you guys is to sort of working out how can you democratize the creation aspect of it as well.
Sorry, and I think it's definitely a design question, right? Like, it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be super active, but I think there's probably a way of balancing where players are very comfortable engaging in something active, but also then through the passive elements and the downtime, maybe that's a chance to kind of make friends or meet new people through that kind of shared experience.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Benjamin, this ties it both into your past with Ubisoft and watching thousands of people stream the latest Assassin's Creed game, or the more social aspect, like as well as your esports background. Like, what's your take on this as well? Is there, like, how do you view the rise of watching games as a participation tool?
I think the big difference for me right now is that you have to consider the whole ecosystem. So when you're, we used to think about, there was the game, the product, the software, and then there was everything else outside, and that was like for the marketing people. But now when you're designing an experience, you kind of have to think about all these stakeholders, and they're as important. So you're the ones who are actively holding the gamepad or matter as much as the people who are watching, the people who are socializing around it. And it has to start, exactly like before we used to say, oh, you can't design your monetization outside of your game design and try to plug them together. It's never working. In the same way now, I think the next step is to start thinking about your experience as a whole and saying, okay, how does it play? How does it how do you socialize with this experience? How do you share this experience? How do you watch this experience? And that is really interesting because it gives a lot of opportunities. And Parin, I think you were mentioning Genvid and like companies like that actually provide tools now to find solutions to be able to really manage to connect these people. Of course, you can think about Discord, as a way. And I think this is also in a way a little bit frustrating to see that I still don't really see games that are definitely kind of really delivering this natively. But I have to use extra additional platforms or a tool to be able to get this kind of complete experience. I have to be on Twitch, I have to be on Powder, I have to be on Discord, I have to use this one. Like even if I want to trade, I have to go to D-Market. Like it's not completely integrated at this point.
But I think that brings us full circle back to Joe's point around sort of integrating with Twitch and like what you're saying as well is like basically leveraging, like when you start the game production, look at what options are available for you as a developer and figure out like which work for your game. But Joe, would you say that, when you start development in the early pre-production stages, that's when you should really start like sitting down and make a conscious decision around sort of how to approach social? Or is that something that you can sort of just tag on later?
I don't think you can leave it like right at the end, but I think it also depends on what level of social you want to integrate into your game. There's so many different options, isn't there? I mean, it could be as simple as just social sharing or a leaderboard, or it could be that social is right at the heart of your game. So it really depends what kind of game you're building and what it is you're trying to do. In the types of games that we make at Snapping a Click, when we add Twitch integration, that is something we have to consider early on. It's certainly not something that we build around at the moment, though. We don't sacrifice the sort of in living room experience to focus on what the Twitch experience would be. We still consider that core experience first. But not long after that, we start to think about, how could this work on Twitch and what could we do to integrate that? And those things kind of start to go hand in hand. I would like to get to a point where we could think about Twitch first and actually build a game more made for Twitch, because our games, I don't, it's hard to know how people are using our games exactly, but we know that typically most people are still playing our games in the living room. More than they are streaming on Twitch, because you always have more people kind of playing than creating. But it would be nice to get to a point where we could start even earlier and say, like, you know what, we want to make something purely for Twitch, and you know, we're not even going to think about the living room experience. We're just going to think about an experience on Twitch and how that would work. That would be nice. But I always think earlier the better, but it's very dependent on how important it is to your game.
Do you see the same thing, Parin, in terms of like there's also questions coming around sort of the metaverses, and like, do you see more and more games and studios that you're talking to making a conscious decision to sort of like, you know, we're going to build tools that will democratize the creation part, or something that's has Twitch built in from the start? Or do you sort of also see developers thinking about it maybe a little bit too late? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Oh, sorry, I thought that was to me.
It's like free for anyone.
Oh yeah, if you have a follow-up.
No, you go ahead, please.
I think we're a little bit biased because we do select for stuff that feels a bit like that. But I think, you know, there's definitely a balance question here, right? Like, the ecosystem that Epic are building is great, and it's great for a lot of people. And if you can build on top of that, fantastic. Same thing around, you know, what's going on with cloud and distribution, and trying to find distribution advantages through, you know, whether it's like I guess tying into the creator economy and like a streamer's audience, or, you know, trying to push more functionality through that streamed experience. I think that's definitely really, really interesting. Does building a metaverse make sense for everyone? Probably not. Does it require a lot of money? Probably yes. Can you build it more cheaply on top of someone else's tech, but still credibly own the customer? Probably, well, maybe. I mean, there's probably a question mark there. So I think, and this is a question around like degree of immersion as well, right? Like, the fascinating thing is, when you look at the bulk of experiences that people play, gaming experiences that lie in people's hands and are monetized, a lot of those are hyper-casual mobile experiences that are nothing like this. So what we're talking about is a very select number of players who have managed over a very long period of time and a really long journey to garner an audience that really, you know, a community that really believes in the type of stuff that they're building. And I think credibly building on top of them to maybe not really take share, but expand, you know, the extent of experiences that have really high accessibility, but really, really great depth that people want to kind of dive into, and is it just optional? I think that's the goal. So potentially yes, and we're, you know, Roblox is obviously a platform, so more and more games are being built within Roblox. There are also studios who are, you know, now just going to build for Roblox. I think that's a really interesting topic. But when you then look at, you know, the EAs and the Activisions and those type of guys, they're not even considering building for that type of platform. So I think that also is fascinating. So the inevitability question is, a startup's looking at places where there's more innovation and more opportunity, naturally so. At what time does the tide turn? I'm not sure, but there's still definitely a place for AAA. It will definitely evolve over, you know, decades, many decades probably.
That makes sense. Joe, do you have anything to add?
No, all I was going to say was I was sort of coming back a bit to Benjamin's point about the like working with these different platforms, and it's difficult to know where things are going to go and what's going to become more integrated into the games. But I think that you have to sort of pay attention to what your audience are doing and what they're using and what experiences they want. Like, we certainly learned from when we were building for Twitch, we tried to strike a right balance between advanced streamers and novice streamers. So we know that a lot of people don't typically stream from the console because they don't have a lot of control, but we try and build in features that you know, that work for people who stream from the console. But we've had to change a lot over time, just noticing how people play, and we've almost like abandoned a lot of ideas because they're just using it from another service, so it just seems pointless us trying to integrate that. I think it's not easy to know where ways are going, but you have to kind of pay attention to what people like, the feedback that you get from your audience and what they find useful and what they don't.
And then what I would add here is that I think that's why it's also very important to develop very closely to your community. And you know, the problem is that right now the pace of development of a game, like obviously not a hyper casual game that you can make pretty fast, but something that is more like going to try to have a higher production value, takes longer almost now that how the world is changing. Like a year ago, there was no Clubhouse, and now you have Clubhouse, and Discord introduced this additional feature, and basically every other social network will provide the same kind of feature now. So if you some people take that as like a lack of vision or a lack of direction to kind of constantly being shifting a little bit your roadmap and your the how your development strategy. But this is just because the reality is that your environment and your ecosystem is changing extremely fast, and so do the expectation of your community. So developing the traditional way, where you do everything behind closed doors and you work for 3, 4, 5, some project can even take longer, and expect that you just come out and you're going to be on par with what people are expecting. I think it's completely missing the point today. And so it's very uncomfortable because in software development we used to have those very straight big roadmap, and we used to love working like that and saying this milestone is going to ship at this point. But now you always have new information, new stuff happening that force you to reevaluate. And so if you're close to your community and if you're on board in your community in this process, it also it's actually a pretty enjoyable experience, but also it reduces very much your chances to fail and to be wrong.
So that's actually that goes into something that I would like to let's dwell on this for a minute, because having developed multiple sort of real-time multiplayer games in a smaller scale than what Ubisoft probably did, I also know that there's CCU concerns. So one of our games, we had distributed servers across the world, and we needed to be very mindful about the players' expectations in terms of matchmaking time to when do they actually churn and how many concurrent users do we need. So is that something that you think should be taken into account and consideration when doing this kind of risk assessment, and also like looking at the opportunities coming in, Benjamin?
Of course. I mean, at the end of the day, you're building a service, and this service has only value if there are people participating to it. So, but again, you see, that CCU challenge that you're talking about, as soon as you start thinking about your experience as a whole and not just about the software, but at how everything is happening around it, in particular integrating social platforms. So let's say here on Discord, you also start addressing a little bit this problem, because now it's not because you're not in the software that you're not participating to the experience. I think another very good example is Star Citizen. So people always like to throw tomatoes at Star Citizen, but for the committed players, for the community that is, who's complaining about Star Citizen? It's like journalists and industry people making fun of them, but the players are actually pretty satisfied because they're part of an experience that, they might not spend that much time in the software, but they're still part of an experience that has a lot of different channels and destinations that also matter for them. Whether it's Discord, whether it's the website, the forums, they're still engaged in that experience. So then you kind of address a little bit that requirement, that to make sure that people are connected at the same time, so that you can get that graceful social experience, because this experience now happens everywhere, and not just in the software at a moment, at a given time.
I think this is a perfect segue to Joe, because like Benjamin is talking about, like I can get panic attacks thinking about like all the things that I should think about and all the things that I forgot to think about when developing like networked multiplayer games, where I also need to rent a server. I need to make sure like people aren't waiting too long in queues. Is that something that you're happy not to think like too much about when sort of, how do you sort of see the gap or the chasm between sort of real social play where you're sitting in the couch together versus sort of the online version of it?
I think there's a lot of differences. Typically, I mean, it is possible to create that same vibe in the living room, but I do feel that online typically is more competitive. You don't get the same kind of, I mean, what I've talked about when designing local multiplayer games, for example, is that players tend to self-police, and they you don't have to worry so much about if somebody cheats or behaves badly, because the peer pressure within the room kind of handles that. But online, it's much more of a thing that you have to deal with, and you have to add and safeguard and add features and actually deal with it in the game. And that can be really challenging, to try and deal with people who want to win at any cost and will cheat to get there. That can certainly take up a lot of your time and your budget trying to deal with it. So not having to worry about that is very freeing. We have worked on online games at Snapping a Clip, but we try to keep them quite simple. We worked on Family Feud last year, and we kept that to just one household versus another household. But the thing about Twitch as well is that when we're doing our own self-published games, we've typically used Twitch as our online mode, and sort of took advantage of that as a platform to say, okay, well, direct everybody through Twitch, and then that kind of takes the pressure off us as developers, because we feel like the vibe of Twitch is very similar to the vibe in the living room. It is very social. It is about hanging out and trying to have fun more than trying to be the best and win. So it certainly takes the pressure off when you're building kind of the games like we do, and we don't have to think about those particular issues in which do happen a lot in online social games.
And I think that also feeds back to Benjamin's point around sort of the community being at the core of a lot of these things. And I think if you meet random strangers online, things turn toxic really quickly. There's like a ton of middleware providers who help like sift that through, right? But in terms of sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, in terms of like community and the role that it plays in sort of shaping the games early on, do you agree, Parin? Is that something that you're also seeing in the studios you're talking to? That like, are you aware, or like, do you look for studios who are conscious in the way that they approach community?
Yeah, I think for us, like the Lego brand is obviously it stands for something pretty meaningful and pretty big. And I think this touches on like moderation concerns, like player safety. I think the idea of like toxicity, but also not just mitigating against that, but like creating a healthy community from the start, I think is incredibly difficult. And we've met a few teams who are trying to do exactly that, and maybe in certain senses kind of countering or going get some of the experiences that they've seen previously at places they work, like Riot and other places like that. And I think it's incredibly hard. I think one of the ways you can do it is maybe put in place obviously a bunch of systems, but like go very young. And kids are generally can be quite friendly actors, and when you put the right degree of manual plus machine-led approaches, I think you can definitely have a good shot on creating a decent community. I think as you get older, it's definitely is a little bit harder, and we worry about that unsavory content aspects a lot of the time. And obviously, if you put a lot of freedom into creators' hands, like they can, it's potential to create anything. So it's a non-trivial problem for sure.
Yeah, I think we're nearing the part where we'll probably need to look a bit at the Q&A questions coming in. So let's see. One of the first questions I've gotten at the very start of the panel was whether the future of gaming inevitably will be dominated by metaverses, so Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, etc. Is there, like, if any of you have any strong opinions, like, wave your hands. All right, I will have to force someone to say something. Yeah, good, Benjamin.
Yeah, no, I'm in dominating. It sounds like it's going to, completely wave out the rest of the experiences. I think what is fascinating about the games industry today is that breadth of experience. You like, will there be AAA? Like, people love to say, oh, this is the end of the AAA era. Well, there might. I don't think it's the end of anything. I think it's more the uprising of everything. It's like every new type of opportunity of experience can kind of exist today. It's as long as it's good and enjoyable. What is fascinating with the metaverse's attempts right now are just that they start giving us a hint on how those experiences can really bring people together in a very, very meaningful way. And we've kind of been fantasized about these things back in the days playing MMO, but all of these MMO had so many limits that would at some point break this escapism, break this immersion in the experience and in the lore, that you would realize that that would just be for fun. And I think what the metaverse is bringing is that it can be for fun, it can be for more than fun, and because it's also I guess kind of supported by the rise of new generations that start to think very differently than us, which are way less binary in opposing, you know, or is it work? Is it like, am I making money? Am I just playing? Or now all of these things can be completely mixed in together. And I see that there's a question about NFTs, so I guess it's at some point it's going to also be brought into the picture. So I don't see that as like, oh my God, this is going to be bad, but more it's going to be one vertical in the industry.
I think, Parin, you also sort of went down that road a little bit and saying, like, is building those types of experiences for everyone. Like, if you're a 5-man indie studio, maybe not the best place to start. Like, start smaller, maybe prove that it works locally, like, and then build on top of that over time.
I think building. I think Benjamin's right. Like, the variety of experience is the important thing. I think there are meaningful niches of the audience that are not really niches, right? If you look at the massive players that represents, and I think part of the question here is like related to post App Store as well, right? Like, does Apple really do anything to take the share that it takes? I think everyone has a view on that. So building something within an existing platform where there's a captive audience, whether it's one of these platforms, whether it's within a social network, right? Like, makes a ton of sense, and it means that you can monetize way less aggressively because you're not paying as much to acquire these users.
That's a super good point. I think also before we joined this panel, we also talked a little bit about sort of the new game It Takes Two. Joanna, I think that's you've played the Prison Break version of that, right?
So I've played both. So there was one before that, No Way Out, I believe it was called, and then It Takes Two as the new one from the same developer. It's fantastic.
But I think the point maybe I should try to make a point before passing the ball to you. The point I'm trying to make here is, like, even massive publishers are sort of backing experiences like that, where it's like a very mindful, a person over here can then share that copy with their friend and they can play together, and that can also be like a meaningful, good experience. So I haven't played the Prison Break version, but I'm playing I'm playing It Takes Two, and it's a really it's a magical experience, especially now where you can't really meet people. So having that as a way of escapism can sort of easily stand side by side with, the metaverses and the large MMOs. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's I think those particular examples as well are really interesting because I think It Takes Two is actually a bit more. It feels a bit more accessible to less experienced gamers, and it feels more mainstream, if you like. Like, No Way Out was a bit more. Felt more game-like, but actually the mechanics of it were very brave at the time. It's like you have to have 2 players, and it's only a 2-player game. To see that do so well, and then to now have It Takes Two, which feels very appealing to people who perhaps don't play games. I know a lot of people, like a lot of couples, who've convinced their other half to play who wouldn't normally play a game off the back of that. And I think that for me is fantastic, because we're just going to see. We can prove that you can make a game like that, make it successful, and that will hopefully the more games like that will get backed in the future.
So I see Chris joined us, and so did
I'm
Langer.
not shutting you off. I'm just to say we have a late arrival. We have a time zone affected late arrival, but Langer is actually here. We do have another 5, maybe max 10 minutes if you wanted to just give Langer a bit of. Give him his here. I know we've discussed quite a lot, so let's not go over the whole thing. But you're a great moderator. I'm sure you'll work him in. But yeah, the lovely Langerly is here with us now.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so terribly sorry about that. I'm all over the place right now. I don't even have my virtual background ready, and I just downloaded it. I didn't even put it on. I realized there's only 10 minutes left. Quick introduction. So my name is Landra. Hi everyone. I'm from Mixi. Very privileged to be on this panel. I believe everyone has spoken a little bit about social. I've seen the topics that you guys have spoken about, but a little bit about what Mixi is doing. We are a Tokyo-based social venture company that does mobile games. We're in sports. We're also in consumer business, I'd say like apps. But primarily, I look at the digital entertainment space. I look at investments as well as strategic partnerships for Mixi on the digital entertainment space. We're probably well known for our one key title called Monster Strike, and that has done really well for us in the last 7 to 8 years. And the main reason why I'm on this panel is because Monster Strike and Mixi as a company is driven primarily by the idea of social. We believe that the core concept of our products is to really bring friends and family closer together. We see our services as a communication tool. And for those of you who probably already know me, my favorite metaphor I like to use that Mixi likes to create in their products is this idea of barbecue. And we want every single game, service, or product that we do to give you the same effect or the same feeling that you get when you're in a barbecue with friends and family. So that's kind of how we approach our products. Yeah, so just quick introductions on my side. I am so sorry once again.
Thanks for joining, and I know the stress of like the time zone thing, because we get it in UK time zone, so you always have to do that mental calculation, make sure that you actually did it right. Yeah. I'm messed it up more than once. One of the topics that we talked about, Langer, was like this sort of, and something that has been a common recurring thread in the Q&A as well, is sort of the concept of metaverses and where you think the future of social is going to be. So right when you arrived, we were sort of discussing that there's room for more than just like only metaverses. Like metaverses will likely not eat up everything. There can also be like different types of experiences. What's your take on this? Like, do you think will Mixi be rolling out the metaverse to consume all metaverses soon?
Yeah, actually, it's an interesting topic because as part of our overall strategy, we are looking at creating, I would say, metaverse type contents. I think metaverse is a very broad term that everyone is using right now, and I think everyone will start to have their own definition of what their metaverse is like. And I think we've seen that quite a fair bit right now. I mean, we've seen Roblox having their own metaverse, Fortnite being its own metaverse, and there are quite a few others right now that are being created. For us, we are looking at it very deeply, and we do think that our definition of metaverse has 3 key components to it. The first component, it needs to be a game first. I mean, it needs to be content driven, and it needs to be content that runs from a live operation standpoint. Right? So games as a service model, the same way how we run Monster Strike for 7 to 8 years. We do think that the next metaverse will have to be able to run for a long period of time. So that's the first one. The second key component, it has to encompass some form of streaming. So streaming is a very broad category as well. It could be an interactive stream type content. We've seen this from companies like Stream Captain, where audiences can interact with the streamer, and whatever inputs that the audiences put in, will affect the overall outcome on the streamer's screen or the game content. So that's interactive streams. We also see that through Genvid. Genvid has done wonderfully on Facebook with Rival Peaks, and that's also an interactive stream content. Cloud gaming is also a form of stream content that we're looking at quite deeply. And last but not least, it's content that's actually just fun to watch, right? So a lot of game creators, when they're thinking of creating a game content, they do not think about how exactly does that equate from a streamer's from an audience standpoint. And there many a time where I'm looking at these really core gameplay. Until now, I play League of Legends, but even when I watch a League of Legends championship match, I really have no idea what's going on at any point in time. I'd have to kind of reorientate and spend a good few minutes understanding where is everyone on the map. So I feel that understanding from an audience standpoint, watching a game or creating a game that is easy to watch, I think is quite critical. The last component that we think that is important as part of the metaverse is the idea that it needs to be a social hangout. And you're going, and to simply to kind of define this very simply, it's really more about your friends or hanging out with your friends in this digital space. We've really seen a lot of products like that. I think Party Royale is a very good example of that. Minecraft is a very good example of that. I think Roblox will continue to build and develop more on this social hangouts concept. So we do think that our definition of the metaverse has to have at least all three of these components. And of course, if you talk about like the content standpoint, there's the genre breakdown for each of these contents. I do think that that's where there will be a lot of differentiation with regards to the metaverse. So that's our interpretation of that. We are looking at developing this in-house. We are looking at partnering up with the key people or key partners with those components, investing and also acquiring in that space. And that's something that we'll be looking to do in the next 2 to 3 years.
Cool. That covers a lot of things. But I think that makes sense. It's really good to know sort of where you stand. I think one of the things we really haven't sort of talked a lot about, but that's sort of something that I'm mindful of, coming from like a smaller studio, non-AAA, but trying to sort of develop a multiplayer game. And that's sort of behind those CCU requirements that we talked about previously in terms of ensuring matchmaking time, enough of a player base to compete with, is also the underlying cost of servers and server cost, and like whether developers should own their tech themselves. Benjamin, this is something that I know you have opinions about. Care to expand?
Yeah, I mean, owning your tech most of the time is something that I'm pushing against. Unless when you're a game developer, you're a content developer, you're developing experiences. So only build the technologies that are not available. I think that now what is amazing is I keep seeing company doing like back-end as services, raising money. And so the competitive landscape is I think I can think of like 12 companies now doing that, from like with different promises, and obviously you have the big ones. I think it becomes less and less. I can see it from our standpoint, where we're developing a game that has to be a single universe that has a part of the experience that are instanced, and some that are completely persistent, where you have your player space with your friends, and this is surviving your session. So we have this combination of, like, at some point we need really high performance, but also we need to account for this persistent cost. Honestly, it's not so much of a challenge anymore. Like those services, all of them scale extremely well, and well from a cost standpoint. So I think it's actually fascinating to see how now you can. I'm not going to be too naive. It's not like anybody with no experience can build an MMO tomorrow, and a very challenging online experience. But I think that if connecting people in the game is now much easier. There are technologies off the shelf, so I would very strongly recommend to use what's available out there.
That makes sense. I think Chris has been summoned.
Yeah,
or summoned himself.
Sorry, I've been in and out, very inconsistent. I do have one area I wanted to just one last area I want your opinions on, because your opinions are very valuable, more than mine. So we haven't really touched, but this isn't a show. This isn't a VR show, but the VR industry and AR, I guess, associated has been quietly gaining pace. It was the next big thing a few years ago. Then it wasn't, and it is. I know a lot of people in that space that are doing quite well now. It's starting to get some real traction. So what do we? That's always talked about as a future of metaverses and social connection. Obviously, Facebook pretty well invested in VR. What do we think about how will VR be a huge factor in the future of kind of social games experiences? Go on, Joe.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I worked on an AR game a few years ago. I've not worked on VR, but I think VR is really interesting in that, it did become a bit of a novelty thing a few years ago. It was a bit of a fad. Lots of people really got into it, and now it's still got this very loyal fan base. But I think to really get it to take off, it needs to be mainstream. It needs to have everybody kind of really into it. And it felt like VR had the potential to do that, but it hasn't quite happened. So I'm not sure what more can be done to get it to be very mainstream, to get everybody involved in it. I do see that it has a fantastic potential to be very social with the fans of VR, but whether it can be the future of social gaming, I think that's really dependent on getting more people into it. I think one one potential barrier at the moment is just the equipment and being able to have a good VR headset, to have multiple VR headsets so that you can do, you know, that people can be still together in the same space and join a social experience. There's lots of big issues to overcome, but I think it's possible, but I don't think it's a sure thing.
Fair enough. Well, there's Quest. Maybe there's even Apple getting involved. Who knows? But anybody else got a view on that before I
mean, this is a personal view rather than Lego Ventures view, by the way. Like,
that's fine.
I'm a proud owner of the Quest 2, and I'm also a firm believer of, you know, when you have a gaming experience that kind of feels like 10x better than anything else you've played out there, and that's like Half-Life in VR. Very specific set of circumstances have led to that game being created. I think that's fantastic. It's still very much an install base question. And whether that will change reasonably quickly. And I know from an investor perspective, I think a lot of people have been burnt in the past around investments in VR, and I'm not 100% sure that means that there's a really high degree of appetite to get back in there. But I think it is really interesting. And the more the install base expands, the more casual the gameplay gets. And I think that's really important. At the moment, it is still very, you know, it's not like that.
If I can put in a few cents worth in this, like I think that for VR, you know, there's a lot of traction right now in social and VR, and you know, I think, you know, right now, I mean, we had the peak of VR, and then now, I mean, then it went through a little bit of a drop, and it's kind of picking up steam. We've seen that increase, you know, through companies like VR Chat and Rec Room having relatively high valuations. And I think the main reason why they're able to do that is also because of how it connects very nicely to the idea of the metaverse. So I do believe that for VR to kind of succeed, there needs to be a strong social component and a strong user-generated content standpoint. And I do think that will probably be the two key drivers helping VR push into the mainstream, right? Especially with content that is being created on these platforms being pushed into Facebook. I'm looking at Facebook content. I see so many crazy, wonderful videos of content that's created by the teams in VR Chat. So I definitely do think that for VR to be mainstream, you know, look to these social VR experiences. Yeah.
Cool.
Fair enough. I also think the VR component, like for me, I also own a Quest. What brought me into it was watching videos of people like going nuts with Beat Saber. So to Langer's point, in terms of like one of your pillars and mixi being, you know, it needs to be fun to watch. That actually also can, I think, be a key driver in adoption for something like VR.
This is where we're headed. This is the future. Ready Player 2.
Oh yeah.
It's very sort of okay, guys. On that note, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time and your insight. Really fascinating. Touched on a lot of topics. I'm going to have to send you into the metaverse now, or the ether, wherever that is. And obviously, if you want to talk to some of these panelists, they're around the show. You can contact them through Meet to Match, the Discord. Please do reach out and ask your questions and and share your insights. But thank you very much, Emil and Langer and Benjamin. And Joanna, and everyone's disappearing. So there we go. But thank you everyone for that panel.
Thank you.
So
thank you all. Hope to see you physically soon.